City Council. Been serving on council now for about 8 years. I serve as the mayor pro tem on council. What that means, I'm basically like the deputy mayor. The mayor is a figurehead of the city, and we have a council manager form of government. The council elects the mayor who represents us. And what I do professionally is I'm a real estate broker. That's what I do full time, is sell real estate in the area. I'm also a rental property owner. My wife and I have a number of rental properties, both commercial and residential rental properties. And so I know what it means to be a property owner, rental property owner, and investor and landlord in our area, because I am one. You should know, so Kelly and I have been married now for 10 years. I've got 2 boys, Fletcher, who's 7, and Leo, who's 4 now, and it just goes so fast. But part of all the things I do is I serve you on the city council in Longview, and it's a big role. Now, that doesn't mean, though, just because the city council is a big role, it doesn't mean that the city necessarily has a role in every asset, every facet of our life. That's just not the way it should be, right? However, you can look all around us and you'll see cities more and more wanting to do more things. Now, some of it is the residents and the citizens sometimes ask the cities and the counties to do more. Sometimes residents will ask the government to do more for them. Unfortunately, and many times you see disastrous results. If you look back to 2009, we had a council member in Longview propose a rental property licensing and inspection program. Today, her husband is running for city council. Yeah. And we got together then, a group of rental property owners and rental property managers, and we were able to stop that proposal. They were proposing $50 per unit in rental property fee in Longview at that time. And thankfully, we were able to get together and put a stop to it, end it, and actually at the time, the city council thankfully repealed the entire program, because at that moment, they had a $1 per rental fee at the time, and they were going to boost that up to $50. 10 years later now, as you may know, they're talking about the exact same bad proposal right here in Kelso. Same bad ideas. Now, you may hear people talk about these new, fresh ideas and these new, fresh perspectives. Some of the candidates who are running for office today are talking about all their great new ideas, but they won't actually tell you what their new ideas are. They're like Al Gore's Social Security lockbox. You remember how he would put Social Security in the lockbox and save it for us forever? So it's like that. These candidates are saving their ideas in a lockbox and refusing to tell us what their new ideas are. I don't really understand how you have a Democrat or Republican way to fill a pothole, or a progressive or a leftist or a conservative way to fill a pothole. I don't get it, because that's what we do at the city, is we focus on police and potholes and pedestrian crossings and things of that nature, right? And the candidates are suggesting that there's these new leftist progressive ways of doing business in the city, and I just don't quite understand that. And they also are not sharing the new ideas. But if we go back to what they have done and what they have talked about, like 10 years ago when they suggested the $50 per unit licensing fee, and like they're suggesting now here in Kelso, we can get an idea of exactly what their new ideas are. And that's higher taxes and fees for all of us that will hurt our tenants and that will hurt the people that they say that they're going to work for the most, right? They say in the name of helping the low-income households and helping low-income people and renters that they want to do all these things. These are the same failed ideas and the same failed policies that have been tried and tested time and time again. They continue to recycle these ideas. There are no new ideas, right? But yet we see all around us, if you're watching what's happening in Portland and Puyallup and Tacoma in Seattle and all of King County, and the dangerous proposals that the legislature, some of them that are being enacted into law. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. I'm going to touch on a couple of them. Part of my role on the City Council in Longview is we are advocates also. We deal with what we're dealing with here at the city, but we also go to Olympia and to Washington, D.C. as advocates on behalf of the city, as liaisons on behalf of our residents to try to advocate for better policy at the state and federal level as well. I've been engaged with the Association of Washington Cities because it's a bit of an interest group. We have to take a collective interest together, the small cities do, and really stand up for defending our cities from actions taken by Olympia. just like we do as property owners. So I make continuous and regular trips to Olympia and know that process pretty well. As a result, I was awarded this certificate from the Association of Washington Cities in municipal leadership based on my involvement and engagement and all that. But what that allows me to do is to work with the lobbyists and work with the legislators and work with the others in Olympia and really become familiar with what's happening there. As you know, the legislature passed 3 laws that are really impactful both to the tenants, our renters, and to us as property owners and landlords this year. The worst of which might be that Senate Bill 5600. That's the one that moved the 3-day pay or vacate up to the 14 days. Obviously, these policies are being debated and decided by people who have no idea what they're doing or the harm that they're causing to free enterprise and to the free exchange of how this works as a business, right? You also know about the House Bill 1440, which puts the requirement on for the 60-day notice of a rental increase, a 60-day notice to increase one's rent, right? When this was happening, I happened to be in a class on landlord-tenant rights in Tacoma with a number of property managers at the time that worked that area, and they were all talking about how they were putting up property for sale. And a study at the same time was released by the King County Association of Realtors, I believe, that something like 58% of King County property owners were considering putting up their rental property for sale, just to get out of the rental business, right? So what happens when we have a housing crisis? Right now we have a severe scarcity of available rental units just for people to occupy. Less than 1% vacancy in Longview at the moment. What happens when rental property owners then decide to sell their properties to would-be owner-occupant buyers? It further harms the renter and our tenants. It further reduces the available inventory for renters to have. It increases rents, and it makes their lives more difficult and more costly. Now, there's many cost drivers. There's the cost of government. That's your property tax, as an example, or the utility rates that we pay. Those are cost drivers as well. If you look at these other factors that government has control over, all of this regulation directly affects the bottom line affordability of housing, and government continues to tighten and tighten and tighten the regulatory climate on private property rights and on property owners, particularly landlords and rental property owners, as you're beginning to feel. The other one is this House Bill 1462. Now, you're probably not as familiar about this one, but what it did is propose that if you were going to substantially renovate one of your units, let me ask you, how often do you hear from a tenant who says that they would like new carpeting, new flooring, or to redo the bathroom or what have you, right? On occasion, we hear from a tenant who begins to complain that they want some updating. Under 1462, if you're going to do a substantial renovation to a unit, you have to give 120 days notice on that. So what we've done is we've changed the culture of a relationship that was based on business practices of a landlord willing to rent to a willing tenant, and that relationship, to now this very rigid regulatory climate creating conflict. We went from a relationship to conflict. And that is the culture of Olympia, and that is the culture of some of the individuals who are running for office here locally as well. And you can see it. One of the complaints they have of City Council is that the City Council votes unanimously too often. For too often does the Council vote with no opposition, that nobody votes no. Look, the way it works is the city staff mostly makes the recommendations to the council. The city staff, who are our experts after all, as the challengers like to say, makes a recommendation that the council should do A, B, and C based on the following reasons, and they bring it to council, and council holds a workshop. And in a workshop, the council talks over the issues, comes up with a resolution, sometimes sorts out differences, makes changes to that proposal, and then brings it back to the council on a business agenda, and then votes on the item. And so normally, yes, there are unanimous decisions. Why is it that these individuals, these challengers, our opponents, those in Olympia and others, would want our city councils to reflect what Congress looks like? Why do they want to invite that kind of division and that kind of politics to our local communities? Makes you wonder if on one hand they say they want to protect and serve the renters and the tenants and help the low income, but all their policies harm them and damage them. And on the other hand, they say they want our communities to be stronger and healthier and we are better collaborative and more cooperative, but yet everything they suggest is divisive. Makes you really question really what they're up to. I experienced firsthand, as you may know, one of the properties that I own, my wife owns, is a hair salon, right? And so we have 9 tenants. They rent a station or a booth, they're called booth renters, some people call, in our building. And they each have their own individual space. They're about 6 by 9 feet in size, each with their own separate entrance, locked. And so they all set their own hours, they all set their own rates, they all maintain their own space, but we have a common waiting room, and we have a common shampoo area and common bathrooms that they share. And they're all tenants. We have a landlord-tenant relationship, right? And so we have a rental agreement, and they rent the space. And part of the space in the rental agreement is they have access to those common areas. Well, the legislature, again, under the leadership of our governor and others in Olympia, thought it would be a good idea to meddle in this issue as well. And so I got to learn firsthand this legislative session exactly what it means to have the progressive left and some others who think they know what's best begin to really meddle in the issue of landlord-tenant issues, right? They say that they want to benefit the renter, the tenant, or the issue of equity or social justice, right? The truth is, if you look back to rent control, which they're suggesting here locally, by the way, there's one candidate running for council in Longview who openly suggested she would be open to rent control. That she would be open to rent control. These have been tested and failed. And these are not new ideas. Many of their ideas, they say, are new and fresh ideas, new fresh perspectives. It's a repeat of the old policies that they've already tried, that they've already failed, and they're suggesting, because they failed in the urban areas and elsewhere in our country, and because they failed possibly at the state level, now they want to bring them into the local level, particularly in our small rural communities. And it's going to cause some harm. Look, if you look at the current council in Longview, we have an exceptionally high-functioning, efficient, and effective city council team. We don't always agree. There's both Republicans and Democrats on the council, but we have a city manager who works well with the council. We have city department heads, executive management team that works exceptionally well with the city manager and the council. If you look all over the community, we've doubled our street repairs and maintenance. We've actually, we have 133 miles of streets to maintain and to repair. We've doubled our efforts there, adding an additional street crew who's out replacing the broken concrete panels in the roads and replacing some of the damaged asphalt. If you drive around our park system, our Longview parks have never looked better before. Our recreation programs for kids and for youth and for seniors are the envy of the region. The city took control of Mint Valley Golf after a couple of years of deficient operation, and we've seen rapid growth in both play and revenues, and the golf course has never been maintained or looked better or had better play in a generation. So we're seeing in many areas of the city very positive improvements. Even with our library, through a process of finding ways to economize and get more efficient and to get lean and to ask tough questions and demand some results, we're seeing many of our departments perform better than ever before. When we've needed to fund critical infrastructure, like a ladder truck for our fire department, after years of begging the federal government to give us a grant for a fire truck, finally we said enough is enough. We have to make the sacrifice, living within our means, using our existing revenue, and make a sacrifice with the existing money we have to buy the ladder truck that we need. The same thing is true of our firefighters. They use what we call SCBA, the self-contained breathing apparatus, the mask that you see the firefighters use that hooks up to their oxygen tank. We learned that they weren't compliant. We learned that they were outdated. We learned that it put our firefighters at risk. And we learned this, we immediately took action to buy them the equipment they need to be safe. It is an expectation that we support our firefighters so that they can be best equipped to help us. When their turnout gear, their bunker gear, was learned to be also deficient and not compliant with the current code, outdated and not useful, that could put them in harm's way, the council immediately took action to replace that gear. Not all conversations we have and not all decisions we make are all that easy, by the way. One of the issues we heard from the Longview Police Department, as that department continues to grow, as we continue to fund additional officers and detectives, new units like the street crimes unit. We have a street crimes unit out there taking care of some of the corner drug houses that we've all had familiarity with over the generations. We've seen the department grow a little bit, and one of the issues we found is they just didn't have enough space. And if you've ever worked in an office environment or in close quarters, you know what it means when you're just too close to somebody in the workplace, that it affects your proficiency and your ability to get your job done. And so what we found is the officers were literally on top of each other to fill out reports and complete reports and do their desk work in computer space. And so we moved ahead with the remodel of the second floor of the police department. Now that remodel was almost 30 years behind schedule. When you look at the initial plans of what the city had planned and intended to do with the building and what the intended build out of the police station was supposed to be, it happens all the time in local government. Local government is well intended and has these good ideas that they have these plans to do X, Y, and Z, and a lot of times those ideas and those plans get put on the shelf and forgotten about because priorities change and there's shifting sands in the community as to what the priorities are. This council has said that public safety is the priority, that making sure that we have adequate fire and paramedic response for people in their need is a priority, and making sure that we address the crime rate and that we crack down on crime is a priority. But part of that is making sure that the police and the fire staff have the tools and the equipment and the resources and the support they need. So we moved ahead with the remodel of the police department. What that allowed to do is now, if you're a suspect or a victim of a crime, we actually have a private interrogation room that you can go in with a detective and have a private conversation with the detectives without being concerned of being overheard by somebody else in the same space or in the hallway. We have private polygraph rooms. So if you need to go and do the polygraph, take the lie detector test and that, now you can do it in a private space. We have locker rooms that meet the needs of the officers. We have now a conference room in the case of an emergency that law enforcement and the firefighters and the leadership teams can get together with the new technology and equipment they need to be successful. So there's some bumps along the way in local government, in decision making. One of those that we had talked about that you might be interested if you have any HUD tenants is Longview had created what's called the Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington. That's Longview's housing authority. You're familiar with the housing authorities. So we have HOSWA, the Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington. When council met with the board members of the housing authority over a period of time, the council and the city had suggested that Longview really ought to be the #1 priority. At this time, the board of this agency was growing and expanding and trying to address the needs of people in other communities as well. In Woodland, at Long Beach, at South Bend, and other areas in our region. And we said, what about Longview? We're entering a housing crisis. We have a housing shortage, scarcity of available housing. Could you focus on Longview? And at that time, the board decided to sell property they owned in Longview that was at market rent, the Blackstone Apartments, as an example in this case, to sell that property so they could buy an office building and pay off debt in another community. And so the council got together with our board of the Housing Authority and asked them and pleaded with them, please focus on Longview. Please focus on providing housing to low-income people in Longview as your priority. And over the course of a year, what happened as a result is the mayor had asked that the board members consider removing themselves and resigning from the board if they weren't dedicated to putting Longview first. And in less than 1 year's time, almost the entire board has been removed and replaced. And we have a new agency director. Our cooperation is the best it's ever been. Our collaboration the best it's ever been. We have grant dollars coming in from the state of Washington, from the state capital budget. Representative Walsh and Representative Blake and Senator Tacko helped us get money from the state to start building housing in Longview again. And now we have a housing authority, the Housing Opportunity of Southwest Washington, now refocused with its energy on Longview. Now, certainly they still do some things in some of the outside communities, outside of our immediate community, and they're successful there. And they're extremely successful in many of their programs. But we would just ask that the agency created by the city of Longview actually focus on Longview. The city's responsible for a lot of things, as I mentioned, but the city's not responsible for everything. There's a proper role and function of the city government. I got to tell you guys, I am very concerned about these proposals to jack up the renter tax. And I call it the renter tax, the $50 per unit that's being suggested in Kelso here right now, because the advocates and the proponents of this don't quite understand the way it works, that most property owners and landlords will pass along these additional costs to the tenants. Bottom line, that's just the way business works. It's going to harm the tenants. As a result, we could see more homelessness. As a result, we could see more families and children. We could see more individuals out looking for housing that just doesn't exist. When we could be focused on solutions, building more housing, addressing the zoning, addressing the cost of government, addressing how do we encourage people to build more multifamily and single-family units, these other individuals are suggesting old policies that are failed and don't work. And it's a critical time. As I mentioned when we were sitting here chatting, right now, if you look at the future of Longview, we could, in a way, look to Aberdeen or other communities as what our future could look like, or we could maintain hope that, is it possible that our brightest days could be ahead of us? Is it possible that we can contain these poor ideas that are being suggested as new ideas, and that we could, as a community, really grow and prosper, that we could see some new industry, some new business, some new jobs, and some growth that would really rise the tide for everybody?